Hello friends, in this video I will tell you about the movie, God's Crooked Lines. Alice Gold, accompanied by an elderly man, arrives at a mental institution. The companion thanks the woman for her courage and she heads for the entrance. The doctor checks the paperwork, which is in perfect order, including her husband's permission to be hospitalized. A letter for the director of the clinic is delivered separately, but since he is not present, the envelope is opened by Dr. Rui Perez. It is a referral from her attending physician, in which he warns that the patient easily finds excuses for anything she does. She is able to disguise lies so that it is impossible to find the truth. And the woman's intelligence is so high that she easily deceives the psychiatrist and anyone else. The doctor interviews the woman. Alice insists that she was legally kidnapped by her husband so that he could take possession of her wealth. But the doctor has information that she was the one who tried to poison the man 3 times, after which she was hospitalized. But if she poisoned him, why didn't her husband turn her in to the police? Only then he wouldn't be able to use her money. It turns out that the woman may be telling the truth. Nevertheless, he is forced to state his paranoia and asks Deputy Director Castell to escort Alice to her room. On the way, she is given a tour of the institution. The new director of the clinic has allowed the patients to walk in the park and has opened workshops, which is beneficial to their well-being. Alice gives up her personal belongings, including her lighter, but asks for permission to take only one book, and Castell, after reading the title Paranoia and its signs, allows her to take it. The woman is carefully examined, given an institution's uniform and advised to choose a simpler name. When she enters her room, Alice instantly changes and pulls out a book of papers and newspaper clippings disguised inside. It turns out that she has infiltrated the facility to find out how the son of her client, Dr. Raymond, who was a patient at the clinic, died. The action is transferred to the moment when one night a fire broke out in the clinic. All the patients were released from their rooms. It was then that the body of one of the twin brothers held in the facility in the present was found. Ellis wakes up in his room and goes to his morning treatments, and then in the dining hall to meet his new roommates. One of them, Ignacio, seems perfectly normal and is even allowed to drink wine and have his own lighter. At that moment, one of the patients, a short man obsessed with strange things, climbs under Alice's table and scares her. Ignacio kicks him out, but the man's guardian, an elephant man, rises to the man's defense. The couple goes to the park, and Ignacio introduces Alice to twin brothers Romulo and Remo, who always have a girl by their side, whom Romulo considers his sister simply because he wants to. The action returns to the night of the accident. The police arrive at the sanatorium and find the murder weapon, a large piece of glass. Ellis in the present again considers a letter received from a client, in which the mysterious killer blames everything on her father. The woman goes to communicate with patients and witnesses the conflict between Romulo and the elephant man, who is barely taken away by the orderlies. Meanwhile, Alice is brought to Dr. Sisser for testing. She passes it easily and flirts with the doctor. The plot shifts again to the night of the murder. The orderlies discover a broken window in the door, but to get to it, they had to go practically through the entire hospital. It turns out that the killer had to set a fire to create a distraction. It's a very clever strategy, and it's unlikely a sick man would do that. Once again, we find ourselves in the present. Dr. Sisser invites Alice in for a cup of coffee and continues to ask questions. A woman distracts him with a question about his appearance, and he unexpectedly overflows boiling water into Alice's cup. He is forced to give her the keys to the doctor's restroom. The woman goes in there and sets up a clog. She runs out into the hallway. While the archivist calls the janitors, Alice finds the transcripts for the right year. It turns out that on the day the letter was sent to the murdered man's father, only Ignacio was in town. The action shifts to the night of the murder. Traces of blood are found on Ignacio's hands, while a forensic car pulls up to the gate. Ignacio is questioned. He's the only one with a lighter, which means he's the only one who could have started the fire. But the man denies the crime. He was just the first to discover the body and tried to help. At this point, the investigator is interrupted, a medical examiner, not the usual one. But the man is annoyed. He doesn't care who it is. Let him do his job. It's the present again. Alice questions Ignacio about the day he was in town. He's the one who sent the letter. But the man suddenly becomes anxious, runs toward the enclosure. Alice detains him until a heavy downpour begins. And then Ignacio falls to the ground and convulses. It turns out he has hydrophobia. The investigator is convinced of Ignacio's guilt, but to get to the broken window, the man would have to cross the flooded hallway, and he couldn't do that under any circumstances because of his phobia. At this point, The doctors realize that there is one patient missing from the wards. In the present, Alice confesses to Ignacio that she infiltrated the clinic with the permission of the director of the institution, who was a close friend of the dead guy's father. The man doesn't believe it, but tells him that the dead guy often fought with the dwarf. And on the night of the guy's death, the dwarf couldn't be found because he was hiding in the garden. Later, Alice sees the dwarf's indecent behavior and sets out on his trail. The plot shifts again to the night of the fire. The director of the establishment shares his thoughts with the detective. If man was created in God's image, like a perfect text, then the patients here are crooked lines that God drew when he was learning to write, and asks not to publicize the crime because the killer is in the clinic anyway. And then the director gets word that a missing patient has been found. In the present, Alice searches the woods for the dwarf, but meets the twin Romulo. He is sure he knows who she is and takes her home. The woman sees a wicker house in the thicket and is amazed by such a creation. And Romulo confesses, she is their mother after all, this house is for her. Alice is touched and hugs the boy, but then she hears a noise and runs. The next moment she is hit on the head and the last thing she sees is a dwarf. Later, Alice finds herself tied to the bed and Sisser announces that she killed the dwarf. At that moment, the director of the clinic enters, who has returned from vacation early. Alice is overjoyed that they will finally be able to discuss her investigation and relates her findings. But the doctor doesn't understand her. He has absolutely no idea what she is talking about. The woman tries to remind that they corresponded through the mediation of the father of the deceased, and the director himself told her how to get to the clinic. But he denies all this. Alice is outraged and intends to demand an explanation from the client. She tries to leave, but the woman is detained, given an injection and sent to the punishment cell. 3 days later, Dr. Castell comes to see her. She has found clippings and notes in Alice's room. Alice tells her side of the story and asks for a medical council to be convened. At the meeting, Alice tells that she infiltrated the clinic on purpose and that the director is aware of everything that is going on, because it was his friend who brought her here. She recalls how she met the dead guy's father at the New Year's Eve ball. She had seen his photo in the newspaper before, when she watched a story about his son's death. Then the man asked for her help in the investigation and showed her a letter of accusation. The letter appeared to have been written by a man with schizophrenia, and the clinic was near the town where he had been sent from. The only way to find out the rest was here. So he called the director of the clinic, who allowed Alice to enter the sanatorium and even gave her advice on how to simulate paranoia. Then she convinced the attending physician to sign a letter she had written and got her husband's confession. Slipping him the form in a pile of other papers, she said she was traveling for work and the dead guy's father had brought her here. She accuses the clinic director of incompetence. After all, he's the reason the unhealthy midget got a free ride, so she's not to blame for his death. The doctor snaps, and it's met with rejection from his colleagues. Alice reminds him that sooner or later it'll all come out, and then he'll have a lot to answer for. Later, the doctors discuss what happened, and there's a difference of opinion. The woman's arguments seem very strong. Her husband and her personal physician should be contacted. But the director suggests remembering her husband's poisoning. The first time she did it was at the club, when she came to lunch unexpectedly. A month later, the attack was repeated after a dinner hosted by Alice, with her dancing in the living room when he became ill and not hearing calls for help. Her husband became suspicious and remembered seeing Alice put something in the food. So he found a vial in the cupboard and put a few drops in her drink. When the symptoms recurred, he gave the vial to the doctor for testing. That's when she made up a story to get here. Her diagnosis: a fictitious personality. Nevertheless, Castell and Sisser insist on an investigation. Otherwise, they will turn to the police. Ignacio later admits that he saw the dwarf die. He himself fell and smashed his head because he was afraid of Ignacio, who caught him trying to possess the emotionless Alice. At this point, Alice turns her attention to the man who was in the office at first talking. The director introduces him. It's the dead guy's father, on whose behalf she is supposedly acting. The woman denies. She was not hired by this man and demands to find her husband. But the man is unavailable and the family doctor is at a conference in Zurich. Alice is electrocuted and locked in a cage. While passed out, the woman relives the recent events, but now she notices faint signs of her husband, the man she thought was the father of the deceased, and the unnaturalness of the men's behavior. She realizes everything was set up and she was the target. She comes to her senses from the voices. Dr. Cesar has allowed her to visit. Ignacio and twin Remo have come to support their friend. She tells the doctor about her suspicions. Her husband planned everything for her money. Her personal doctor is away and no one will be able to confirm her right. The woman offers to check her bank accounts, but you have to get into the bank to do that. The board has to be convened again. Meanwhile, the director discovers that Alice has been moved back to the ward and Sisser goes to the police to file a kidnapping report. Castell searches the principal's office and finds an invoice for a large sum of money from Alice's husband. She is caught by the director himself and the girl demands an explanation. The man admits the fact of receiving the money, but all of it went to the development of the clinic since it was a donation. He announces the girl's dismissal and asks her to leave the institution and then orders the staff to look for Alice. Meanwhile, Dr. Sisser is denied the case. After all the documents are in order, and in the clinic no one can find the woman because the patients help her hide. She thanks everyone and asks for help getting out. She already has a plan and asks Ignacio to give her a lighter. At this time, Sisser goes to Alice's house and makes sure that her husband has not been home for a long time, and on the wall hangs the woman's ID card. She really is a detective. At the hospital, a toy workshop catches fire. At this time, Ignacio, overcome, opens the water in his room and begins to scream in shock. While the orderly runs off to fetch the doctor, the man opens all the rooms and calls for the patients to come out. Panic ensues, during which Alice breaks a window and opens the laundry room door. She finds the medical staff's clothes and walks calmly to the exit. At this time, Ignacio discovers Romulo's twin dead. That's when the police arrive and begin to investigate what happened. Alice approaches the gate, but stops. In front of her there is a car of the medical examiner, and the woman asks to be let inside. She has been called in to examine the dead Romulo. Upon hearing the name, Alice attacks the woman, swaps clothes with her, and goes to examine the dead man's body. The emotionless medical examiner is mistaken for Alice in the dark and informs the director that all the patients are in place. But the detective recognizes the woman and everyone runs to the office where Alice is being examined by Romulo. She asks to be arrested, because now the police will have to deal with her case, and she knows the killer. When she examined him, she noticed multiple injuries to the body, which could only be done by a very strong man. In fact, it was Romu who protected her from the dwarf, and the elephant man saw it. Plus, the elephant unrequitedly loved Romulo's so-called sister, so he smacked the guy around. The police examine the elephant man and find cuts on his arms. Alice claims her detention against her will. The principal is against her traveling outside the facility, but the detective reports that they do check her accounts and they are empty. Castell presents the director of the institution with demands for his resignation, which is signed by all the doctors of the clinic. An extraordinary board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow to discharge Alice Gold. Alice goes to see the remaining twin and it turns out that it wasn't him who died, but his brother Remo. He was just scared that night and his brother left him in his room while he was looking for his sister. Alice comforts the guy and promises to visit him later. Her things are returned to her and she goes to the council. The woman easily answers all the doctor's questions. The director scornfully notes the unprofessionalism of his stupid colleagues who fell for her tricks and declares his dismissal. The medical board unanimously votes for Alice's sanity. The man who brought Alice to the clinic enters the room and it is Alice's personal physician. He approaches Alice and wonders what she's gotten herself into now, but the woman can't answer. Quite a difficult plot to follow, but very intriguing. The movie is watched with great interest. Write in the comments what you think about it.